Ladies and gentlemen, again, I would like to welcome you to the Putnam County Firearm Owners Association debate for the office of Putnam County Sheriff between incumbent Sheriff Robert Langley, who has the Democratic and Keep Putnam Safe endorsements, and Kevin McConnell. He has the Republican and Conservative endorsement. Kevin is also the former MTA police chief. Some ground rules, gentlemen. I think you received them early, but for everyone to know, you'll each have a 3-minute opening statement. You will also have a 4-minute closing statement. As the questions get asked, you have 1.5 minutes to answer. And if you feel that there's a rebuttal needed, you have a 1-minute rebuttal. We have a timekeeper right in the center. Raise your hand there, Kim, so he could see you. He has some countdown cards, so we respect that everyone will follow good, safe rules here. All right, so if we can have some questions. The questions will be pulled out randomly, and we will ask and direct the questions to where the question has been directed. Okay. Oh, I guess I'm pulling them out randomly. Okay. Nothing up this sleeve, nothing up this. I'm glad I bought these. All right. First, we're going to allow opening statements. So we will allow the incumbent to go first. You have 3 minutes for an opening statement, sir.
Thank you. Well, everybody knows I'm Sheriff Robert Langley. Been with the Putnam County Sheriff's Department starting my career in 1984. Proud to be a public servant, always have done it my entire adult life. It's about community. It's never been about party for me. It's one thing I'm proud of, staying nonpartisan. Okay? There's too much division when I get a little feedback here. There's too much division when we're playing the right to the left. I think it's important when I look at the Constitution. We the people. That's who I represent as the sheriff. The people. I take the Constitution very seriously. It's a very important document to me. And I look back when that was written. That is a document that has withstood the test of time, been challenged time and time again. I take our rights very seriously. It is my duty to protect those rights. It's my duty to protect you, the community. And I do that. I do that well. Since I took office, reduced crime by 50%. These are stats from New York State Department of Criminal Justice Services. According to U.S. World News, Putnam County is one of the 20 safest counties in the United States. According to Putnam County Intelligence, we have reduced opioid-related deaths in this county by 50%. According to the New York State Department of Criminal Justice Service, we have reduced domestic violence by 74% in Putnam County. This is what we all have to do together. Not about the right, not about the left. It's about all of us as Americans working together to keep our community safe. What are we doing about what's going on with these vehicle break-ins, the vehicles being stolen? Well, look back at 2019. If you heard of the felony lane gang, it's the same thing. They were breaking into vehicles. They were stealing vehicles. We put together a joint task force with the FBI. We took them down. This happened in 2019. We worked through it. In 2020, we took them down. We went from Florida to Maine. Okay? This was a RICO Act. They were stealing millions of dollars by creating other identities. What are we doing now? We have 2 task forces working together on this. It's going down 2 different streets. Can't get into the details because, again, we will take them down. This is what we do as law enforcement for our community to keep you safe. We work with all law enforcement. We work with all agencies, not only the local agencies, but our adjoining agencies in other states and our federal partners in law enforcement, because it is our responsibility to keep everyone safe. Thank you.
If we can have Mr. McConnell, your opening statement, 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good the Putnam County Firearms Owners Association for setting up the debate, and Hudson Valley Shooting Sports for hosting the event at their facility. I want to thank my wife and my family for their love and support, and I want to thank everyone that came out here tonight. Bob, thank you for coming, and thank you for your service to Putnam County. As you know, I spent 30 years in law enforcement, rose through all the ranks to become chief of department for the MTA Police. It's one of the top 10 largest police departments in New York State. We manage the budget, we manage personnel, we manage police operations, and a host of other planning and research and development, training, internal affairs, and a number of other issues related to that. I'm running for sheriff because the current leadership has brought us higher expenditures, archaic and ineffective management, and a host of questionable decisions and behavior. As chief of the MTA, I was aware of what leadership means. Leadership means planning, research, budget, operations, administration, and relationships with law enforcement agencies. We covered 5,000 square miles, 16 counties. We had great relationships with them, from the New York State Police to the NYPD. We worked on a lot of joint operations together, and we were successful in keeping people safe. But most of all, one of the things that leadership means is accountability. Accountability and responsibility. And that will be the hallmark of my administration, not just during the good times, but also during bad times. And that accountability and responsibility goes towards the deputies and the corrections officers of the Putnam County Sheriff's Department, as well as the legislature and you, the citizens of Putnam County. Leadership means being accountable, especially in terms of budgeting, deployment of personnel, and crime strategies and tactics. I believe in spending tax dollars that would directly benefit the public good. Programs and strategies that make us safer and more secure while respecting your rights. I will work with our deputies to identify vulnerabilities and cost-effective create solutions to these problems. This is about leadership that can identify tomorrow's problems and provide effective and efficient solutions for the future. My administration will be the beginning of a better future for law enforcement and you.
Thank you, gentlemen. The first question I picked, I have to say, it was for Sheriff Langley, and unfortunately, I can read the first line, but then that's it. So if this is your card, I believe the name is John, besides your current position, could you come up and kind of write this question a little better? Thank you. The next card we have is for Kevin McConville. What experience do you have running the jail and the civic duties of the sheriff? You have 1 minute and 30 seconds to answer that. It's from Susan Medali.
Thank you. I have no experience running the jail, but I'll tell you a few other things that I had no experience on. Homicide investigations, 9/11, the London and Madrid bombing and train interruptions in England that we were concerned about, that were going to bring their way here to Putnam County, into New York City and on our transit system. There are a host of things that I have no experience on. But as an individual with a bachelor's degree and a master's degree from Marist College in criminal justice, and the relationships that I've built with law enforcement professionals and agencies throughout the tri-state region, I don't feel that that will be problematic. The jail is an operation that has to be run efficiently, and you have to be effective with your deployment of personnel. Currently, members of the Corrections Division are working 3 force doubles. This is after bail reform, when the jail population has reduced significantly. One has to ask why. There are solutions available. Albany is part of that solution through the State Commission of Corrections. One needs to get in contact with them, request the accommodations, and then make the proper solution effective in order to manage the jail operation correctly.
Okay, we have a 1-minute rebuttal. Sheriff Langley?
I just want to be clear on one thing. Nobody in the Putnam County Correctional Facility is being forced to work 3-man doubles. Rikers, yeah, we see that on the news all the time. Putnam County, absolutely not.
Okay. We did get that question straightened out, so this is for Sheriff Langley. Other than your current position, what other supervisory experience do you have? 1 minute and a half.
I've served with the fire department, started in fire service when I was 18. I've served as a lieutenant, a captain. I've served as a chief. As a chief, I was responsible for budgeting, training, manning, equipment. I also served as a supervisor, supervising deputies on patrol. Prior to deputy sergeants being required on all shifts, the senior deputy was responsible for the supervision of the shifts to ensure the shifts were covered, properly manned. I was responsible for supervising trainees to ensure that they received the proper training and met New York State Municipal Police Training Council requirements. I was responsible for signing off on them and certifying them to be fit as police officers with the Putnam County Sheriff's Office.
Okay. This question is also for...
Should I rebut?
Absolutely.
Thank
A
you
minute
very
for
much, sir.
rebuttal.
Thank you. I'm a graduate of the New York State Municipal Police Training Council Sergeant Supervisory School. I served as a lieutenant, and also during my career I served as a lieutenant executive officer for a number of divisions as well as the Patrol Bureau. That expertise and that experience is incredibly important to managing a law enforcement agency. As a captain of a division, I supervised over 70 personnel. As chief, I supervised 785 members of the department. And that includes meeting with law enforcement officials from every county and municipality in the 14 counties in New York in which we operated, as well as the state level and the New York City level. So I have the experience in terms of supervisory and management skills to manage an organization. Our budget was over $100 million. We were always on or under budget.
Okay. This question is for Sheriff Langley. What is specifically your plan to deal with civil unrest, dealing with property damage and violence? Minute and a half, Sheriff Langley.
To deal with civil unrest, well, the first thing is to develop relationships with the leaders of these groups that create the civil unrest, to create peace in the community. Everybody has a voice, they want to be heard. Oftentimes it can get out of control. I think during the George Floyd incident, we've demonstrated how we maintain peace and kept civil unrest at bay. We developed relationships with both sides. We had them demonstrating across the street from each other, counter-protesting, but yet we maintained peace and civility amongst everyone. Relationships with the community is vital. Working together is vital, and this is how we maintain peace and defray from civil unrest.
Thank you. I have the experience of having served in a police department that was involved in a number of different protests. We had the AIDS activists, we had the WTO, and we had the WHO in New York City, which ended up being very violent. The way you handle a large protest is the way we were trained first and foremost. Law enforcement remains neutral. We take no sides. Our side is the law to make sure that the people that want to protest are able to do so effectively and efficiently under the guidelines of the Constitution and New York State penal law. We did that. We were successful. You meet with both sides. You talk to intel groups from throughout the region to find out what information you can develop on the groups, whether they're violent or whether they're subversive in terms of people infiltrating their demonstrations, and you react accordingly. Thank you.
Okay, this question is for both candidates. What is your position on diversity, equality, and inclusion? And will you recommend DEI training for sheriffs, deputies, if elected? The question is from Eileen Riley. Sheriff?
Again, like I said, the Constitution's important to me. We are all equal. I treat everybody equally at the sheriff's office. Having diversity in the department is important to me. One of the steps I took was to ensure that we bring in a diverse group of people. I asked the Putnam County Personnel Department if there was a test for bilingual officers. Never been done before. We did it. This opened up the door, and we were able to bring in people who are bilingual to the sheriff's office, which benefits the community. As you know, we do have a Latin American community, most predominantly in the village of Brewster, and sometimes there's a language barrier. And oftentimes we're involved in cases there. Training. We can never get enough training. Oftentimes the funding for training is difficult to get and does impact our budget with overtime, because when we take someone off to train them, we have to cover the shift with another officer, and that incurs overtime. Part of Executive Order 203 is to ensure that we have the most adequate training to address all the issues, and I support all the training, as mentioned.
As chief of the MTA Police, I'm proud to announce that our minority representation in the law enforcement agency was at 49.4%. We worked with our Office of Civil Rights and our Employment Department to ensure that our law enforcement agency was representative of the community that we served. That's a remarkable feat. We were one of the top 3 in the tri-state area to have those type of numbers in terms of representation. As far as training, we were ahead of the curve. We did bias training, implicit bias training, and a number of others through the Office of Cultural Diversity, the MTA, to ensure that we treated everyone fairly, respectfully, and with integrity.
Thank you, gentlemen. This question is for Chief McConville. What public service projects have you been involved in Putnam? The question is from Lillian Jones.
I'm sorry, could you repeat it?
Absolutely. What public service projects have you been involved in Putnam?
Lillian, thank you for that question. I've been involved in a number. The most recent, which I'm very proud of, we worked with Drug World, a pharmaceutical company in Cold Spring, a pharmacy actually, and we were able to get a small number of volunteers, and myself, my wife, developed a list of 14 nurses that volunteered throughout the pandemic to provide vaccinations to over 5,500 people in Putnam County. I'm very proud of that. We did that even though we were all not eligible for the vaccine, and it was entirely a voluntary group that was able to put together that vaccine in that pod, point of distribution, at a number of different locations. And one of the groups that benefited the most from that was the elderly population, our senior citizens. We went to their housing, and we were able to deliver right to their front door those vaccines to keep them safe, healthy, and well. And that was quite an accomplishment in a small community of Cold Spring.
Great. And this question is also for Chief McConville. What are your goals for the Sheriff's Department, and how do you plan on delivering them? Achieving them.
Thank you. I have a number of goals, but first I have a vision for what law enforcement should look like in Putnam County. And we will articulate that to the men and women of the Sheriff's Department so that they understand that that is the creed and the belief that we want to impart upon them as they deal and serve the public. They wear on their shoulder patch at a number of different locations: dedication, loyalty, and service. We will restore that motto to ensure that each and every member of the Sheriff's Department, whether it's the Road Patrol or the Corrections Division, provides that mantra to the people that they interact with. Service to the public is a very difficult situation in the sense that you're trying to solve someone's problem in a fairly limited amount of time. I don't believe that that's accurate. You take all the time you need to solve that problem, and you do it effectively, and if that means calling in other resources and assets, that's what you do to address those issues. So I have goals and missions that we will impart and we will make part of our creed to the law enforcement community in Putnam County, and you will get the best services possible at the least amount of expense to the taxpayers.
You, Sheriff, you have a 1-minute rebuttal.
Thank you. Just want to point out, the men and women of the Putnam County Sheriff's Office do serve this community with dedication, loyalty. They have pride in what they do. I have pride in each and every one of them, and I stand by them. I've protected their rights. When they couldn't get a contract and unfair games were played, I stood by their side to ensure that they got a fair contract. They're important to me. They're my family, and I have their backs.
Thank you. That question, by the way, was from Edward Barnett. I have another question here. It has no name. I'm going to ask Sheriff Langley. It's addressed to you, and it says, how can you claim to have lowered domestic violence crimes when victims are trapped in their homes with their abusers?
Again, as I stated, the stats are from the New York State Department of Criminal Justice Services. This is information as received from all law enforcement throughout Putnam County to New York State. It is registered with them. That information was obtained by me through their portal. This information is available to anybody. It's public information. You can go, you can look at the site, you can get the same information. I also developed relationships with the Women's Resource Center, a relationship that was severed, that I restored. And working with them has made us better at dealing with domestic violence, and I believe that has truly helped reduce domestic violence in this county.
I just want to take a minute. If anyone else has more questions that they would like to fill out cards, could you kindly make sure you put your name on the bottom of the card? I have another question for you. Would you like a rebuttal? I'm sorry.
I would.
I got to pay more attention.
No
Please,
problem, that's
Chief.
fine. So if you go on the Division of Criminal Justice Services website and you look at the crimes relating to domestic violence, county-wide, it's broken down by county and it's broken down by agency. County-wide in 2018, there were 52. In 2019, there were 72. In 2020, there were 107. Now, if you dig a little deeper and you look at just at the Putnam Sheriff's Department, in 2018, there were 28. In 2019, there were 21. And in 2020, there were 26. So I'm not very good at math, but when I did the math, I came up with a 7.14 increase in domestic violence. So I think that figure needs to be checked again by the sheriff. And also in my discussions with DCJS, the uniform crime reports have not been filed since April of 2021. So the numbers are behind due to a failure to file that.
Gentlemen, thank you, by the way, for paying attention to our timekeeper. You guys have been real great at that. Sheriff Langley, this question is for you, and again, I apologize, there is no name on it. How do you handle complaints against your deputies, and what process do you follow? A minute and a half.
Okay, all complaints, whether it's to say the deputy did a great job, not everything has to be a complaint. Or if it is a complaint on the deputy's performance, we have a performance evaluation that's open to the public through our web portal, or they come to our office and fill it out. Complaints can be received anonymously or with your name attached to it, which would enable us to follow up even more on a complaint that's made. A complaint is submitted to a supervising officer to conduct an internal investigation into that complaint to find out, is there merit to this? Do we need to take action on this? If the complaint has merit, the appropriate course of action is taken. Depending on the severity of the complaint, it could result in termination. It could result in extended probation. It could result in loss of some vacation time. It could result in a letter of censure. It could result in administrative counseling. Or it could result and then supervisory counseling before it reaches the administrative level. Okay, it depends on the nature of the complaint, and it has to be dealt with accordingly.
Here's how I would do that. All complaints get investigated. Executive Order 203 in June of last year articulated the methods by which the public could submit complaints. There were a number of changes. It could be in person, it could be in writing, or it could be via email. Nonetheless, each and every one of those complaints needs to be investigated. Why? That's an internal control process for a law enforcement agency. And where appropriate, you take corrective action. One of the things you do as you look at these complaints, you look at your policies and procedures to ensure that your policies and procedures aren't causing the members of your law enforcement organization problems and sending them down the wrong paths. So I take personnel complaints, as we call them, very seriously, and we will meet with the complainant if it's possible, if the complainant files a name. If it's an anonymous complaint, we're still going to investigate that, because complaints against a law enforcement officer have to be investigated, and they have to be detailed so that where and when you can take corrective action. And corrective action covers a host of different things that you can do, but you must look internally first to see if it's your policy and procedure that is causing a problem. If not, you address it through corrective training. Thank you.
Thank you. Chief McConnell, this question for you. Since you have been out of law enforcement for 14 years and the MTA handled different kinds of policing, how have you enriched yourself on all the new laws, including bail reform, discarded, I apologize, this handwriting is interesting, and police reform and training for your new officers?
Thank you. I've been out of office 13 years. I've been away from law enforcement, and for 12 of those 13 years, I worked as a director of security and emergency management at a medical facility, which required that I interact with law enforcement each and every day on a number of related issues. So with respect to that, I've kept abreast of the changes to the penal law. I've read the police reform statutes, and I'm familiar with bail reform. In 2019, I authored a letter to the editors of various newspapers in Putnam County warning what bail reform would do because of its draconian effects and impacts in the implementation process. It went from one extreme to completely the other. Bail reform should have been done incrementally to see what was working, how it's working, and why it either working or not working. That didn't happen. We went from arrest and confinement to virtual release. And as you can see in our neighboring counties, if you look at the crime stats, crime has significantly dropped throughout the 5 counties covering Putnam County, significantly since 2016. Bail reform is not the reason. There are a number of other reasons, and I'll get into those in a minute.
Sheriff Langley, 1-minute rebuttal.
Yeah, I just want to point out that, I've been in office. I've been leading the sheriff's office and managing the sheriff's office and supervising 160 members. And bail reform is one of the things that took place under my leadership. And I stood up there in Albany with the Sheriff's Association, lobbying our senators and our assembly against bail reform, against discovery reform, against 50A. These laws have greatly impacted how law enforcement operates. It's become a catch and release. I don't agree with it. I didn't support it. And I still don't support it.
All right, this question is from Dan, and it's for both of you. With the recent rise in violent crime in New York City, if you were sheriff, how would you improve things? Why don't we start with Chief?
Thank you. First meeting I would have would be with all of our associate law enforcement agencies, Town of Carmel, Town of Kent, Village of Brewster, and the Village of Cold Spring. I would then meet with the New York State Police and any other law enforcement agency that has jurisdiction that comes through here. Additionally, I would speak to the intel units to gather intelligence from New York City in terms of what crime trends and patterns that we would see potentially eking their way into Putnam County. We see it right now with the 40 cars that have been stolen and over 110 cars that have had property stolen from them. And to say, lock your doors, that is not a crime strategy. That's a public service announcement. I would do things differently, significantly differently. I would meet with district attorney's office and the ADAs, and we would strategize and put together orders and plans to combat any increase in crime. I would monitor that through my command staff to make sure that we were aware of any criminal activity that took place that rose to a level of concern before it was a concern to the public. And that's a much less number than 40 stolen cars and 110 cars broken into. We would be on top of that, tracking it, preparing, training, and developing plans to address it.
Langley, same question. With the recent rise in violent crimes in New York City, if you were elected sheriff, how would you improve things?
Well, we're already addressing that. Again, we've developed relationships with other agencies. The Westchester Real-Time Crime Center, which is constantly working 24/7, monitoring what is going on out there, what crimes are taking place, what patterns there are. It's now the Westchester Putnam Real-Time Crime Center because of our strong working relationship, and we have an officer assigned down there as well, along with Carmel Police having an officer assigned down there. So we're on top of what's going on. We're on top of the current trends. As far as working with local law enforcement, again, we've reestablished those relationships. We have a strong working relationship with Carmel, Kent, Cold Spring, Village of Brewster. It's important to have these relationships. It's not about the sheriff's office. It's not about the New York State Police, again, another organization we have a strong relationship with. It's about us as law enforcement together getting the end result, and that's ending crime, putting the bad guys away, and keeping the community safe. And we do this by working together in solidarity.
Yes? Absolutely.
I know you have
Chief
another
Chief
question.
McConville, you got to just kind of let me know. 1 minute for a rebuttal.
Thank you. Those relationships are broken with the town of Carmel, with the town of Kent, with the Village of Brewster, and Cold Spring Police Departments. I've been endorsed by the New York State Police, the New York State Police Investigators Association, the New York State Court Officers Association, because of my strong relationships, and including the Sergeants Benevolent Association of NYPD, because of my track record and history of working with these law enforcement agencies and developing strategies and programs through the implementation of task forces to combat crime, to keep officers safe, and reduce criminal activity in our communities. Thank you.
Great. This next question is for Sheriff Langley. How did you select your captains? Why have 3 left and the undersheriff?
How have I selected my captains? My captains were selected based upon their qualifications, based upon their background, based upon their job performance. Can you tell me which undersheriff they're referring to? Would that have been Undersheriff Corrigan? Is that who you're referring to? Okay, because I do have an undersheriff. I just want to be clear on that.
I don't, it says, why have 3 left? Then there's a plus sign, TH, undersheriff. So I don't know what else. If
Well,
the
I'm going to
undersheriff is still
presume
there.
it was Undersheriff Corrigan who decided to retire because when Judge Reeds passed away, he'd come to the realization that he'd made promises to his wife to travel and spend time with her. And when Judge Reeds passed, it was an awakening call for him. And he felt he had a duty to his wife and his family, and he did just that. And I respect that man 100% for thinking of his family first before job.
Again, no name on the card.
Okay. My first captain, when we came into office, he resigned very shortly thereafter because he thought this would be a retirement job, much like his part-time jobs in some of the part-time Westchester County agencies. That was his choice. With the legislature defunding the police time and time again and restricting our budget more and more, and yet with us overcoming, other captains resigned because of those reasons.
You don't have anything? Oh, yes, okay. I don't know, I'm waiting
I'll
for the
give you-
little,
I'll wave
the little
for you.
wave over here. Chief McConville, go ahead.
So
1
here's
minute.
how I'm going to select my command staff. I'm going to have a transition team. They will accept applications from individuals that meet the qualifications to be a captain or above in the Putnam County Sheriff's Department. They will interview those. These will be professional law enforcement officers that do that will be high-ranking from their former jobs, that put together a list of people to be interviewed. I will meet with them. I have a vision of what I want. It's simple, the best and the brightest. None of my friends, nobody's been promised a job or any secret deals. There's no text messaging. There's, hey, I knew you from high school, or I went to elementary school with you. There's none of that. I want the best command staff we can put together. And that includes potentially some of the people that are left. I think there's 2 or 3 captains left in the Sheriff's Department. I will meet with them, find out what worked, and ask them to apply if they're interested. Sorry, Kim.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we have 3 more questions left, and the choice is up to you. We can all listen to closing statements and go home early, or if you'd like to take a minute or 2 in the back or over here and fill out some more questions, please put your name on the cards, and we'll be happy to go to our regular scheduled end time of 9 o'clock. Thank you. Okay, so this is for Chief McConville. What do you plan to do differently in the Sheriff's Department than what is being done now?
And I only have a minute and a half?
A minute and a half, yes.
Okay. A lot of things. Strategy, supervisory programs, leadership development, training, and community relations and intergovernmental relationships, not with just the legislature, but with the towns and villages in Putnam County. That hasn't happened in I don't know how many years. We will assign personnel from the rank of captain up to attend meetings, to be the liaison to these community governments, these community groups, to ensure that we have an open and a continuing dialogue with the members of those towns and villages, as well as at the county level, to make sure that we are addressing issues, because problems in Putnam Valley aren't the same problems in Southeast. Problems in Kent aren't the same problems in Patterson. And as I've gone throughout Putnam County in this campaign, I've met a lot of people. I've had a lot of people tell me about the problems that they've encountered with the Sheriff's Office, and that speaks to leadership. So I will be a leader, front and center, at all times, to ensure that the men and women of the Sheriff's Department have someone that knows what law enforcement is supposed to do and how to do it.
Sheriff Langley, 1 minute debate.
Thank you. Just want to point out, I've always had an open door policy. I'm out there with the public, talk to people. I don't hear these complaints. Nobody's come to me to make these complaints. Matter of fact, all I hear is positive reinforcement of the work that the men and women of the Sheriff's Office are doing for this community. The change in the atmosphere, that these officers are approachable. The training that we do for them, keeping up to date with their CIT training, the domestic violence training, how they deal with these types of incidents. Thank you.
Okay, this question is for both candidates. Joe Biden has indicated that he will send federal agencies to enforce vaccine mandates and elected officials at school board meetings. How do you respond? This question is from Frank Zabeda. Chief McConville, would you start? 1 minute and a half.
I think that's despicable and it's unnecessary. I think as a law enforcement agency, we can handle that and enforce constitutional laws. I think the federal government is overreaching by attempting to do that and have weaponized the Department of Justice through the FBI with that maneuver. That's disgusting. In the Constitution, the First Amendment gives you a number of rights. Free speech is one of those. You can go, and you should go, to your school boards and voice your opinion. However, when that opinion turns to violations of the law, which are threats and so forth, that's when local law enforcement can step in and take the appropriate action. There's no need for the FBI. They have more serious things to concern themselves with than what goes on at a school board meeting. I think that is completely outrageous, and people should be upset about that. The mask mandate is a whole nother ballgame. They've not declared an epidemic with that, so there are limitations constitutionally what they can and cannot do. Kim? Okay, so I think that is a complete waste of federal resources. Again, they have more important things to do. I think it's unconstitutional, and I think it's a complete horror that the President of the United States would seek to interface himself with school boards. It's just absolutely disgusting, and I wouldn't allow it. We'll do everything we can to enforce the law here, and there's no need for the DOJ or the FBI to step foot into Putnam County.
1, 2. Sheriff Langley, same question. Joe Biden has indicated that he will send federal agencies to enforce vaccine mandates.
All right, can everybody hear me? All right. So, I'm going to have to agree with past Chief McConville. I'm a constitutional sheriff. I'm a member of the Constitutional Sheriff's Peace Officers Association. 14th Amendment is the First Amendment that comes to mind. Your personal autonomy. Right? You have a right to your body. It's your body. You have a right to your opinion as well, and I'll give you that under the First Amendment, under freedom of speech. The masks, even when that order came out, it was said, this doesn't have any teeth to it. We can't even enforce it. You know what? Again, it is your body. If you want to wear a mask to protect yourself, that's your choice. But to force everybody to wear a mask, the Constitution comes into play. To force vaccines upon us, the Constitution comes into play. This would be like saying, we're going to sterilize people. Okay? Look at the Native Americans. How many were sterilized because they may have chose to go to a clinic and they were sterilized? Can't do that. It's their body. You, as a government, do not get to make that decision. We, the people, have our rights, and I will protect your rights. I would not allow that to happen.
This question is for candidate McConville. Why were you barred from Putnam County intelligence meetings by Sheriff Thorborn? This is by Erin Lee Croney. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so this is a question for candidate McConville. Why were you barred from Putnam County intelligence meetings by Sheriff Thorborn? And it was, question is from Erin Lee.
Well, Ms. Lee, thank you for that question. It's completely untrue. I was never barred from any intelligence meetings was Sheriff Robert Thorburn. When Sheriff Thorburn was a sheriff in Putnam County, I was a lieutenant working in different districts. I did not work in Putnam County, so I had no need, no inclination to attend any intel meetings in Putnam County. Thank you.
All right. Sorry,
The voice from above.
that was hot. Both candidates, question. How many debates will be held with both candidates attending? This question is from Ed Barnett. I don't have an answer for that. I hope you do.
I know I have at least 3 more debates on my schedule that I will be attending, should nothing happen to me. But I have every intention of being at the 3 debates that are on my calendar. If there are more that come up, I'd be more than happy to attend them.
McConville?
Thank you. I'll attend as many as I can based upon my calendar. I know that we've had conflicts in the past, and the organizers of these debates or the Meet the Candidates events have been informed that I missed one, I believe, so far, but I have a couple on my calendar that I'm more than happy to come and exchange my ideas and my vision with the public and the voters.
Okay. Again, this is for both candidates. With the legislation of recreational marijuana, what testing is currently utilized to determine drug levels when erratic driving is observed or a traffic accident has occurred? I don't care. You, Chief McConnell, candidate McConville, if you want to start, that's great.
Thanks. Absolutely none. Nothing exists. They passed this recreational marijuana law, and nothing for the field officer exists in order for them to make a determination whether testing. What the officer has to do is use his driving while intoxicated training to state that the individual that he stopped seems to be driving while under the influence of drugs. All right, so there are vehicle and traffic sections in the current vehicle and traffic law that allow for the application, but there's no physical test that you can give on scene in the street in the middle of the night at 10 p.m. or 4 a.m. for an officer to make a determination that an individual has been using drugs. What has to happen is you have to request a warrant, has to be blood tests, and hopefully the hospital has the technology to perform that test and provide you later on, pursuant to the warrant, with the information that there were drugs. Now, most hospitals don't test for drugs. They don't test for marijuana or THC. All right? So that's critical to know, so that when you apply for the warrant, you have to specifically articulate what drug that you are looking for in order to get the test results back from a laboratory. Thank you.
Would you like me to read the question again? Or?
Sure, go ahead, just so I'm positive what it said.
Yeah, we'll have to struggle through it there. With the legislation of recreational marijuana, what testing is currently utilized to determine drug levels when erratic driving is observed and a traffic accident has occurred?
Okay. First off, you have your standardized field sobriety tests that will give you an indication if someone is impaired. Now it's incumbent to determine, is this an alcohol impairment or a narcotic impairment or marijuana impairment? If there's no presence of the odor of alcohol, then we would call in a DRE. This is a person who's specially trained to identify the presence of any type of drug substance in their system. It would be their determination if this person is impaired by marijuana or another substance. And part of that training is they have to identify the substance that somebody is impaired by. Upon that determination, they are taken into custody. Much like a DWI arrest, you don't need a warrant. You give them a standardized reading that they're under arrest for driving while legally impaired by drugs. You have the right to refuse to submit to a chemical test of your blood. And it goes on, and they can refuse that test. If they refuse that test, it goes to a DMV hearing. But you do not need a warrant to secure that test. No different than a DWI arrest, and there is a way to determine if there is a presence of a drug in their system. However, with the testing, the THC levels, there is no known specific level of THC to determine does this level or this level impact their ability and make them impaired. So this is something that, again, is going to have to be worked out through the system. Thank you.
Candidate McConville, this question is from Alice for you. Why did you leave your job at MTA and hospital?
I retired from the MTA police in 2008. I believe it was January 14th to accept a job at NYP Hudson Valley. Why did I retire from the hospital? To prepare myself for this run and this candidacy for sheriff of Putnam County. Thank you.
Okay, Candidate McConville, this question is also for you. You twice ran against Sheriff Smith after Smith publicly admitted to lying about Adam Levy. You then openly endorsed Smith. Did that mean you cemented Smith's behavior?
Cemented? No, I supported the Republican candidate for sheriff. I'm a Republican, and I supported the candidate. I had many discussions with Sheriff Smith about the best way to address the issue and the lawsuit. He declined my advice, and that was his prerogative. But I did meet with him and members of his team and had that discussion, and I supported his candidacy. Don Smith and I didn't agree on a lot of things, but we ended up being friendly. You can disagree with somebody on strategies and tactics and techniques, which I did with Don Smith for a number of years. And I still disagree with a number of things that Sheriff Smith and his administration did. I would have handled them differently based upon my training and my experience and my relationship with other law enforcement agencies. It doesn't mean I don't like him or that I have to dislike him. We have a difference of opinion in terms of law enforcement operation and administration. And to this day, we respect each other, although we don't agree on certain things relative to operations and administration. So I did support the Republican candidate in the election. That candidate lost. That's what brings us to this stage today. Thank you.
Okay, this question is from Jean for both candidates. We'll start with Sheriff Langley. As sheriff, how would you deal with an adversary legislator regarding funding and overtime for deputies? Sheriff Langley, if you
Can you just
wouldn't-
repeat the last part of that?
Yes.
Overtime funding for?
For overtime funding and overtime for deputies.
Okay. Well, the first thing I looked at is the historical use of overtime in a department. And historically, the overtime has been higher than what I am currently budgeted for. So I have to go back to the legislators and ask for money. And what we do is we take monies that are from open personnel lines that have not been filled, so that money sits there, and there's a reserve there, and we can transfer those monies to fill that overtime without creating a financial impact on the taxpayer. Now, the legislature has a fiduciary responsibility to the taxpayer. Part of fiduciary responsibility is to protect the taxpayer's funds. The other part of fiduciary responsibility is to invest. Investments don't always have a return. Your investment in public safety doesn't have a return. This is to protect the community. This is to provide 911 services, sheriff's department services for law enforcement, the jail. That is part of a fiduciary responsibility. I have never gone over my department budget. Have I gone over on lines? Yes, but we've moved money from other lines, much like every other corporation does, every other county government does. But I have never exceeded my departmental budget. I have done more with less as the sheriff.
Same question, candidate McConville.
Thank you. First thing, you have open positions in the budget, fill them. Call for the list, hire, interview, perform the backgrounds, and hire personnel and look to fill those. Second, when I was chief of the MTA, on a monthly basis, if not more frequently, I was required to go into the MTA board along with the MTA chairman and provide reports, okay? Those reports detailed not only our activities, but our overtime expenditures. I would take 6 briefing books into those meetings with me, and we would provide answers to each and every question that was asked. We broke down our budget so that we could account for every expenditure. Any new expenditure that I wanted, I performed zero-based budgeting process to request that. You start with zero, and you justify the expense and the rationale for it. That was not difficult to do if you had a legitimate request. The transfer of over $215,000 in the last 4 months alone by this sheriff from the jail operations budget to road patrol to cover overtime is excessive. I never transferred any money anywhere near that amount to cover any overtime expenses. As a matter of fact, we were on or under budget with our overtime expenditures.
Sheriff Langley, 1-minute rebuttal.
Thank you. Just want to point out the hiring process in this county requires the submittal of a vacancy control form, which has to be signed off by the personnel department, has to be signed off by the Commissioner of Finance, and has to be signed off by the county executive. If it doesn't receive those 3 signatures, I don't get to fill those positions. I don't have authority over the county executive. I'm a law enforcer. I'm not a lawmaker. If those positions are not returned to me, I can't fill them, so that money sits there. Why not use that money to keep this county safe? Why not budget realistically when it's presented to the legislature and the county executive? Why must they defund the police? Thank you.
Legislature's function to budget. It's the chief law enforcement officer in Putnam County, the sheriff, to request the funds and to provide justification. And in the last year and a half, sitting in protective services meetings and full legislative meetings, I have yet to hear that. No wonder the men and women of the Sheriff's Department are frustrated. They are not getting the support and the backing that they deserve and so desperately need. We did that in the MTA. We hired people. And you know what? If you have to get 3 signatures on a piece of paper, trust me, I'll be outside your door each and every day for as long as it takes to get that signature. And that will occur. Thank you.
All right, this question is from Erin, and it is for candidate McConville. In your letters to the editor favoring D.A. Levy, you had concern about Tendy's election being cataclysmic to the justice system. We know now you claim that Tendy had the backing of the Republican machine. How do you feel your current relationship with the Republican machine will influence your behavior if elected?
First of all, I don't consider the Republican Party to be a machine. It's a party. And within parties, we certainly encourage differences. And at election time, we work very hard to ensure that those differences don't split us or cause problems. And once former District Attorney Adam Levy lost the primary to Robert Tendy, that was over. We went on to the general election supporting Robert Tendy, who's been elected twice as District Attorney of Putnam County. My relationship with him is good. It spans a number of years before when he was a criminal attorney, and we had a lot of discussions about different cases and case decisions and Supreme Court rulings. So I have no fear in my relationship with Robert Tendy, nor do I with anyone for that matter. Differences are what makes America great. We should encourage them, we should respect them, and most of all, we should respect each other. Thank you.
Yes, Sheriff.
Yeah, I just want to be clear on my relationship with the District Attorney's Office, specifically District Attorney Tendy. When I came into office, We sat down together, we spoke. Since that day, we've had an open relationship discussing cases. If my office has a problem with somebody in his office, or his office has a problem with someone in my office, usually because of a breakdown in communications, we address it. We work on cases together, we discuss cases, we make sure that his office has airtight cases to prosecute. It's important for the sheriff's office, specifically me as the sheriff, to have a good working relationship. I support district attorney. I think he's a great district attorney for this county.
Thank you. This question is from Michelle Patterson. Thank you for a neat handwriting that I could read. Thank you. It is for both candidates. What do you think of the no cash bail law, and what can we do to make things better? We'll start with candidate McConneville.
I'm not in favor of the no bail, the bail reform law. I think it's had adverse impact, not only here in Putnam County, but throughout New York State. You can see the number of recidivist crime activists that have occurred and the actions of those. You look at the subway shover in the last couple days, number of times she was arrested, given an appearance ticket in New York City called desk appearance ticket, and released, out to do harm again and again and again. And she nearly killed the woman that she pushed into the subway train most recently. Again, as I said earlier, I think the legislative body should have done that incrementally, make some adjustments. Could bail reform apply, and was it needed? Absolutely. But I think when they enact sweeping changes to virtually no bail for a number of things, and even further remove the authority from judges to use their discretion to raise a higher bail, a bail level, or to remand someone to a county facility, that just made it completely worse. And everyone was concerned because we knew it would just be a matter of time before the so-called bad guys figured out, go ahead and arrest me, I'm getting an appearance ticket, I'll be out in an hour, I'll be out in 45 minutes, and I can do what I want. And they removed the warrant application process. They made that much more difficult, as well as discovery in the reform law.
Same question. What do you think of the no cash bail law, and what do we do to make things better?
Again, I'm just going to clearly explain my observations as a society in a whole. It's not right or left. I think the bail reform was a bad thing. It really was. It's a joke. It's catch and release. This is what you hear from them. It's catch and release. I'll be out of here before you finish your paperwork. We had stalker cases. You arrest, arraign, release. Back stalking, arrest, arraign, release. It's an endless cycle. Albany needs to take bail reform and take it off the tables. Go back. Make it the way it was. Sit down with your Magistrates Association. Sit down with your District Attorneys Association, your New York State Sheriff's Association, your Chiefs of Police Association. Work together. Are there some things that you don't need bail on for a violation? Yeah, I don't think you really need bail on a violation. But if we've got somebody from Connecticut that's committing a crime in New York, there should be bail. Once they cross that state line, I can't drag them back over the line. If I drag them over the line from Connecticut to New York, I'm committing a felony now. It's tying our hands. It's making us unsafe. Bail reform needs to be repealed. It needs to be redone, done the right way, with everybody working together for something that works for all of our community, to keep us all safe. I don't know what else to say. It was a bad decision, and it wasn't worked on the way it should have been worked on.
Candidate McConneville, 1 minute rebuttal.
I'm a little confused. My opponent said, put it back the way it is, and then he said, make changes to it. Well, they never interacted with law enforcement, nor the District Attorneys Association, or any victims groups on this bail reform. I can tell you right now, when I'm elected, I will be an advocate for correct bail reform, and I will be contacting, as I did previously and as I continue to do, our representatives, not only at the local level, but at the state level, to ensure that this upside-down world gets turned a little bit more in the correct position. And that's critical. As a sheriff, I'll have a voice. and I'll be able to go to Albany and have engagements and meetings with personnel and lawmakers to explain, along with my colleagues at the New York State Association of Chiefs of Police and the New York State Sheriff's Association, the impact that this bail reform has had, because there's been intended consequences and far too many unintended consequences.
Sheriff, 1 minute rebuttal.
Thank you. Just want to clarify, turn it back the way it was before they created bail reform, the old way, when there was bail. That's what I meant by make it the way it was. It needs to be repealed, period. It's not safe for us. It's not safe for anyone. Thank you.
I was trying to limit the rebuttals to one.
All right.
So if we can keep that. This question is for Sheriff Langley. How do we control overtime in the, I'm going to change the name here, Sheriff's Department moving forward?
How do we control overtime? That's a good question. First thing is you need to take a realistic look at your staffing levels. We put 6 cars out in Putnam County. That's 1.5 cars for each town that does not have a police agency that's dedicated to them. Town of Carmel has a dedicated agency. Town of Kent has a dedicated agency. Village of Brewster has a dedicated part-time agency. So does the Village of Cold Spring. The average is 1.5 cars for every 8,000 residents here in Putnam County. The national average recommendation is 3 cars for every 1,000 residents. I think we're severely understaffed. I'll settle for having 2 cars in each town, which would be a minimum of 8 cars out there, and say my minimum is 6, so if 2 call in, I could still run with the 6 without incurring overtime. You need to hire more deputies. I presented this to the legislature. I presented the numbers, the facts, the population, and the number of cars we put out there. Hire more deputies. You won't incur overtime. Overtime's cheaper than hiring new deputies because you don't have the overhead with them for medical, retirement. But it's safer if we hire more. It reduces overtime, and the deputies are safer because they're not working doubles.
Gentlemen, this question is for both. Absolutely. A
you-
rebuttal for 1 minute.
So how do you manage the budget? You manage the budget. You manage, okay? You look at your crime statistics. You do a data analysis to see when crime is occurring. And you deploy by scheduling personnel to meet that activity. You follow the terms of the contract in terms of giving people days off and vacation and personal leave and those sort of things. And if you're a little strapped, if you can't get personnel, you talk to associate law enforcement agencies and you say, we're short tonight. We'd like to have X number. We have Y. Can you help us out in this particular area? State police do it all the time. We did it with the state police, and we continue to do it to the state police as I was the chief of the MTA police, and it continues to this day. So you work with law enforcement agencies, but you manage your budget. You develop a budget based upon that expenditure so that you're prepared for it.
Okay. This question is for both candidates from Rachel. How do you plan on resolving the issue of drugs in the county and in the schools? And we will start with candidate McConneville.
Thanks. Thank you very much. So the School Resource Officer Program is in place in a number of schools in Putnam County. That program has to become more robust. There has to be more interaction by members of that unit within the schools in terms of teaching, in terms of developing intelligence and information, and then that information and intelligence has to be relayed back to either the narcotics unit and or the patrol bureau to ensure that appropriate action is taken. The opioid deaths in 2019 were 18. Last year, 2020. In 2019, they were 18. In 2020, they were 16. They've only been reduced by 2. The non-fatal overdoses remain at a 40-plus level. So drugs are still a problem. They're not going away. And with a lack of enforcement at the southern border, you're going to see an increase in the amount of drugs that are coming across the border to be sold here in the United States. And as part of that increase, they'll end up here in Putnam County because they are synthetic and they are inexpensive. And there's a lot of money to be profited from by bad people that want to sell our children these drugs. We have to take a more proactive step, and that begins in the school with our school resource officers, our Bureau of Criminal Investigation, and an intel unit specific to Putnam County that coordinates with associate agencies.
Sheriff Langley, same question. How do you plan on resolving the issue of drugs in the county and in the schools?
Our school resource officers are very active in the schools, and they are involved with education with the students in the schools. So that was offensive to those officers. They do an outstanding job in drug education for the students throughout the county in all the schools they work in. As far as the other end of it, dealing with it in the community, again, we work collaboratively with our local law enforcement, our adjoining agencies. We have 2 investigators that are assigned to the DEA. With bail reform, catch and release. Every case that we can, we take federally through the DEA to ensure proper justice to get the dealers off the streets. This is serious. It's a serious problem. Okay? Opioid epidemic, it's not over. We still have people that have abuse issues. The death rate is down, but the use rate is still there. That is the next goal, is to target people who suffer from addiction and work towards that. Get the drugs off the street. Our narcotics enforcement unit is doing that. They're making arrests constantly. These are cases. They take time. You have to build the cases. It's not just a buy-bust operation. We build good, solid cases. And again, our partnership with the DEA, that's the route we go. Some cases go locally, but every case we can, again, I emphasize, we take it federally.
Candidate McConneville, a 1-minute rebuttal.
Thank you. The move to take a case federal, while sounds good, it actually detracts against what's going on in the community, because most of the drug dealing is local. You have to identify the sellers and the dealers and the holders, and you have to go over those people that are bringing it to the community and distributing to other people to sell the drugs. And you do that by working with various law enforcement agencies that have narcotics task forces, and you utilize their information, their expertise, and you work with their personnel to address the issue locally. And to say that the school resource officer program is robust, that's just hurtful, because it isn't. There are a number of schools where the SRO is not allowed to teach or interact all that well with the student body or students in the school program. And that is a sign of a lack of leadership. You have to identify that and address it.
Sheriff Langley, 1-minute rebuttal.
Thank you. Just so you know, we keep these cases locally, depending on the severity, depending on how many times they've been arrested for narcotics dealing. They could serve under a year. They may get sentenced to state time, maybe 2 to 7. Federal charges are a minimum 10-year sentence. That's pretty substantial. Do you want them back in the community? I don't want them putting poison out there on the street for our children, for our family members. We want justice for our community. We want to keep our community safe. We want to keep our streets clean. We want to help those who suffer from addiction and get the drug dealers out of our community.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mike, I'm hoping that Rachel's question about drugs is suffice to your question. Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on to the next one then. Sheriff Langley, who dispatched, authorized, and desired you to strip Putnam assets to invade Danbury by Catay?
To invade Danbury.
Yeah, thank you.
Really,
That's what it says. Okay, it's all right, we
And
don't
I
have
don't know
to
how to
answer
respond
that
to
one.
that based on how it's written. To invade
And by the way,
Danbury, it
gentlemen,
sounds
you're
like we're
happy to
trying
look
take
at all
over a
these
country.
questions that I have been putting under my little book here. Sheriff Langley, for you, please identify the top 2 recommendations from the recent Putnam Police Policy Review that you have successfully implemented. And that question is from Carla.
Okay. Well, the first thing is I am working with the community of color, with their board. I've provided them with the materials that they have requested, so as we can work collaboratively together on our policies to better serve our community. The other thing is we've started a pilot program with body cameras in the sheriff's office.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So here's what didn't happen. As my good and late friend Butch Anderson did in Dutchess County, there was minority recruitment right away. That didn't happen in Putnam County. Didn't partner with personnel and attempt to recruit a diverse workforce, which was a mandate of Executive Order 203. And the other thing that didn't happen that I find particularly disturbing was the policy revisions that were required. Use of force, complaints, pursuit driving. We've had a number of incidents involving high-speed pursuits, and in this day and age, I don't know too many law enforcement agencies, other than the Putnam County Sheriff's under your leadership, that still has a pursuit policy, especially after everything that went on in the West Coast and has worked its way across the East Coast in terms of dates, times, and conditions for any type of pursuit.
Thank you. We have no more questions, and before we go to closing statements, I'd just like to thank the Putnam County Firearm Owners Association for putting this together, hosting it, and we want to thank all of their volunteers that took the time to put all of this together. Believe it or not, any kind of organization like this is a lot of hard work, and there's always only a few people that volunteer to do it. So we want to thank them for, let's give them a hand. And again, just one last thing before we move to closing statements. Election Day is Tuesday, November 2nd, and early voting starts Saturday, October 23rd. And again, on your way out, if you didn't pick one on the way in, grab one of these voting cards, and that tells you the times and locations of early voting. So gentlemen, I hope we're all ready for some closing statements, and we're going to allow the incumbent to go. First, Sheriff Langley, if you would, 4 minutes for a closing statement.
Thank you. I think my leadership speaks for itself and what we've done during my tenure as sheriff. We've reduced crime, we've reduced opioid-related deaths, we've reduced domestic violence incidents. Our policies meet state and federal mandates. Our use of force policy is always being adapted to the changes in law. It's been updated. It was submitted to the panel during the process of Executive Order 203, and it's changed several times since then to meet both state and federal standards. Pursuit policy. I'd hate to think what would happen if we didn't have a pursuit policy that set guidelines, what you can do, what you have to do. Somebody committed a homicide and was fleeing the scene, and it was right in front of you as an officer. Oh, we're not going to pursue that person who's a threat to society? There are levels which you should pursue, which you should not pursue. We do have a pursuit policy. We train in that pursuit policy. And again, that policy has evolved and changed with the times. Opioids. Nobody's immune from opioids or addiction. It's something that we all have to be compassionate about. It's something we have to address. It's an addiction. We do that. We work with the community organizations. We work with Hope Not Handcuffs to help the people of this community. Narcotic sales, we address that. We go after the dealers. We put them away. Mental health is another national crisis that's not often talked about, not often mentioned. It's usually the root cause to a lot of problems in our society. Sometimes it's violent crimes. I think of my deputy responding to a mental health call who was stabbed. I hate to think what would happen if we ran understaffed by moving deputies to other shifts, to have more staffing on another shift and less staffing on a day shift. You never know what can happen out there. Nothing is routine. Pull the car over. Could just be somebody on their way to work. Or you can pull that car over and it could be one of the people that just broke into a car and stole somebody's firearm that they left in their car. And they're shooting at you. Much like what happened in Westchester County when they engaged that vehicle and they started discharging from an AR at the police. Nothing is routine. Nothing is the same. You never know. It's important to have proper staffing on all shifts and not jeopardize the safety of the men and women out there that are protecting you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff Langley. Candidate McConville, if you have 4 minutes for your closing statement.
Much. Again, I too would like to thank the PCFOA for hosting this debate and Felix and the Hudson Valley Shooting Sports for being generous enough to let us use their facility. One thing that you'll never hear me say is Putnam County is safe. Can you ever be safe enough? Are you ever completely safe? The obvious answer is no. There's always law enforcement work to be done to continue to make you safe. And again, since 1985, from Sheriff Robert Thorburn, Putnam County has always resided in the top 20 of safest counties in New York State. With that being said, there's a lot of crime going on here. In the last year alone, 40 cars stolen. 40 cars. That's 40 families that walked out of their house in the morning and had no car. And 110 families that walked out of their front or side doors and found property missing from their vehicle. And what's been done? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. There's been no strategy to that other than a public service announcement to lock your doors. That's unbelievable. This is a clear choice. There's a choice between looking forward or remembering. I have the leadership, the abilities, the skills, and the knowledge to bring this law enforcement agency, the Putnam County Sheriff's Department, forward, to work collectively and collaboratively with associate law enforcement agencies whom I already have a very good relationship with to make it better and to make you safer. Because at the end, it's all about your safety. I want to talk about deployment and personnel responding to calls. That's training and it's data analysis. You look at the crime reports, you analyze those, and you deploy based upon that. If it calls for 6, well, obviously you're going to try to get 7. If it calls for 7, you might want to try to inch that up towards 8, because can you ever have enough? No. But you use the data that is readily available at your fingertips at a computer screen to do that analysis. Why do you do that? The Real-Time Crime Center does data analysis. Are you looking at that and figuring out what trends and patterns exist? The answer is no. Are you talking to other intel units in law enforcement agencies and finding out what crime patterns and trends and strategies exist there? The answer to that is no. Are you talking to the New York State Police, who have a wonderful crime analysis center in upstate New York that constantly breaks down crime trends and patterns? And are you talking to them to get information and intel? Are you talking to their intel groups to get information, to develop a list? Are you talking to the people in Hartford, Connecticut, where these so-called idiot kids, as they were most recently called, are coming from? No. Are you talking to Bridgeport? The Bridgeport jail has one of the best intel units in the state of Connecticut. It's unbelievable with the data that they can provide you relative to criminal trends and patterns. I've worked with that intel unit. We've received actionable intel from that agency, and we've made some outstanding arrests with that. So the choice is clear on November 2nd. Vote for me for a professional, responsible, accountable law enforcement agency here in Putnam County. Thank you very much.
Let's thank the candidates. I just wanted to take a minute to thank the audience for their participation, their thoughtful questions, and of course the Paladin Center and Hudson Valley Shooting Sports for allowing this facility for us to have the debate. Ladies and gentlemen, safe drive home, and again, candidates, thank you very, very much for your time. Have a good evening.